She was 19 years old and homeless. No family she could return to. No money in the bank. Just a backpack, a duffel bag, and $1,128 she had been saving in a coffee can for 3 years. And with 10 of those dollars, she would buy a rusted houseboat tied to a forgotten dock on a backwater inlet in southern Louisiana. The hull leaked. The cabin walls were rotting. The marina owner said she would be lucky if it stayed afloat for a month. But what nobody knew, not even the man who sold it to her, was that below the deck of that old houseboat, hidden in a compartment that had not been opened in over 40 years, was something that would change her life forever. This is the story of Wren Calloway, and it begins, as all stories of water do, with a pull that cannot be explained. Wren Calloway had been moving toward water her whole life without knowing it. She was born in a small town in central Mississippi, the kind of place where the nearest body of water was a muddy farm pond behind the Hendricks property, and the nearest river was 40 miles away through flat cotton country that stretched to the horizon in every direction. There was nothing about that town that suggested boats. Nothing about the dry, cracked earth or the dust that hung in the summer air, or the way the heat pressed down on everything like a hand trying to keep the world from rising. But Wren had been drawing pictures of boats since she was old enough to hold a crayon. Her mother found the first one when Wren was 4 years old. A lopsided thing in blue and green with a triangle sail and stick figures standing on the deck, waving at no one. Lorraine Calloway had looked at that drawing for a long time, her coffee growing cold on the kitchen table. Something moving behind her eyes that Wren was too young to understand. She saved it. She saved all of them. By the time Wren was 9 years old, the folder in the kitchen drawer was an inch thick. Crayon boats with crooked masts. Marker boats with impossible colors. Pencil sketches of sailboats and fishing boats and tugboats and houseboats. Ships with smoke coming from their stacks. Dinghies with oars that looked like insect legs. Cabin cruisers and catamarans and vessels that existed only in the imagination of a girl who had never seen the ocean. Lorraine kept every single one. One evening when Wren was 8, she asked her mother why she saved them. Why she kept these drawings of things Wren had never seen, things that had no place in their landlocked life. Lorraine had knelt down beside her daughter and brushed the hair from her face. Her hands smelled like the lavender soap she kept by the kitchen sink. Her eyes were soft and knowing, the way mothers' eyes become when they see something in their children that the children cannot yet see in themselves. "You have the soul of someone who belongs on the water," Lorraine said. "I do not know where it came from. Not from me, not from your father. But it is in you, Wren. I can see it. Someday the water will call you home." Wren did not understand what her mother meant, but she never forgot the words, and she never stopped drawing boats. Lorraine Calloway died when Wren was 11 years old. It happened on a Tuesday in October, the kind of day that gives no warning. The sky was blue. The air was cool. The leaves on the old oak tree in the backyard had just started to turn gold. Lorraine was making dinner. Chicken and dumplings. Wren's favorite. The kitchen smelled like broth and butter and home. The radio was playing something soft and old, a song from before Wren was born. Lorraine was at the stove, stirring, humming along to the music. And then she was on the floor, Wren heard the pot hit the linoleum before she heard her mother fall. She came running from the living room where she had been doing homework, and she found Lorraine lying on her side, her eyes open but not seeing the wooden spoon still in her hand. Brain aneurysm. That is what the doctors said later. A blood vessel in her brain that had been waiting her whole life to betray her. And on that Tuesday in October, it finally did. By Thursday, Lorraine Calloway was gone. Wren stood at her mother's grave on a gray morning with her father beside her and a handful of neighbors behind them, and she felt something inside her break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, quiet fracture like a crack forming in ice that would spread slowly over the years until the whole surface gave way. She was 11 years old, and she was already starting to understand that the world was not safe, that the people you loved could be taken from you without warning, that you could be making dinner one moment and gone the next, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Her father, Emmett Calloway, was a quiet man. He worked maintenance at the high school, fixing broken desks and leaky pipes and whatever else needed fixing. He was good with his hands, patient, methodical, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once, who believed problems could be solved if you just took your time and worked through them step by step. But Lorraine's death was not a problem that could be fixed with patience and a toolbox. After she died, something inside Emmett stopped. Not all at once, but gradually, the way a fire stops. Ember by ember, flame by flame, until what is left is gray and cold and no longer gives any warmth. He still went to work. He still came home. He still made dinner, though it was never chicken and dumplings. He still sat in his recliner and watched the evening news. But he was no longer there. Wren would talk to him and he would nod. She would ask him questions and he would answer in single syllables. She would sit beside him on the couch, hoping he would put his arm around her the way he used to, and he would just stare at the television with eyes that saw something far away, something only he could see, something that had to do with the woman who was no longer in the kitchen, no longer humming along to old songs on the radio. By the time Wren was 14, she had learned to stop trying to reach him. It hurt less to stop than to keep failing. She became a ghost in her own house, moving through rooms that were too quiet, eating dinners at a table where no one spoke, lying awake at night listening to the silence that had replaced her mother's voice. She still drew boats, but she stopped showing them to anyone. Wren got a job when she was 16 years old. It was not the kind of job most 16-year-olds in her town got. Not bagging groceries at the Piggly Wiggly or flipping burgers at the Dairy Queen. It was a job at a small marine supply store outside of Jackson, an hour from her town by bus. The store was called Haskell's Maritime Supply. It sat on a dusty strip of highway between a tire shop and an auto parts store, and it looked like the kind of place that should not exist in a state where the nearest ocean was 300 miles away. But it did exist, and Wren found it. She found it by accident, really. She had taken the bus to Jackson one Saturday to buy supplies for a school project, and she had seen the store from the window. The sign out front had a picture of an anchor on it, and something about that anchor called to her the way her mother had said the water would someday call. She got off at the next stop and walked back. The store smelled like salt water, even though the nearest salt water was 200 miles south. It smelled like rope and canvas and the oil they used on marine engines. The shelves were stacked with boat parts, fishing gear, life jackets, navigation equipment, things Wren had only seen in books and catalogs. She stood in the doorway for a long time, just breathing it in. The owner found her there, a man in his 60s with weathered skin and calloused hands, and eyes that had seen too much sun and too much water. His name was Haskell Broussard, and he had been a Coast Guard rescue swimmer in his 20s before a back injury ended his career and sent him inland. He looked at Wren standing in his doorway, this skinny girl with the hungry eyes, and he did not ask what she wanted or tell her to buy something or leave. He asked if she knew what a stuffing box was. She did not, but she wanted to learn. Haskell hired her that day. Part-time weekends and summers minimum wage, minus the bus fare that ate into everything she earned. Her father did not care. He barely noticed she was gone. But Haskell noticed her, not because he felt sorry for her. He was not the kind of man who felt sorry for people. He had pulled too many bodies out of the Gulf of Mexico to waste time on pity. He noticed her because she actually wanted to learn. She memorized the parts catalogs. She learned the difference between marine epoxy and regular epoxy. She learned what a stuffing box was, what a bilge pump did, why fiberglass needed gel coat. She learned that ropes were called lines on a boat, and that everything had a specific name, and that the names mattered because, in an emergency, you did not have time to point. Haskell taught her to splice a line, to read a tide chart, to identify a boat by its hull design from 100 yards away. He taught her the difference between a keel and a centerboard, between a schooner and a sloop, between a boat that was built to race and a boat that was built to last. He taught her that a boat is a system, and a system can be fixed if you understand how it works. Everything in life is a system, he told her one afternoon, his hands moving automatically through the repair he was doing while his eyes stayed on hers. Houses, cars, people, weather, money. If you can see the system, you can fix the system. If you cannot see it, you are at its mercy. Wren listened. She learned. And something inside her, something that had been dormant since her mother died, began to wake up. She saved every dollar she could from her paychecks at Haskell's Maritime Supply. It was not much. After bus fare and the few expenses her father did not cover, she was lucky to save $20 a week. But she saved it, dollar by dollar, week by week, year by year. She kept the money in a coffee can in the back of her closet, an old Folgers can with the red plastic lid that still smelled faintly of grounds even though she had cleaned it 3 times. She liked the weight of it in her hands, the way it got heavier month by month, the way she could shake it and hear the bills rustle and the coins clink. It was proof that she was going somewhere. She did not know where yet, but she was going. By the time she was 18, she had $880 in the coffee can. By the time she was 19, she had $1,140. And then her father died. Emmett Calloway died on Wren's 19th birthday. She came home from her shift at the store tired and dusty and looking forward to nothing in particular. It was October again, 8 years almost to the day since her mother had died, and the leaves on the old oak tree in the backyard had just started to turn gold. She walked through the front door and called out to her father, not expecting an answer. Not really expecting anything. The television was on. The evening news was playing. The anchor was talking about something that didn't matter. Emmett was sitting in his recliner. His eyes were closed. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked peaceful. That was the strange thing. That was the thing Wren would remember later in the months and years that followed. He looked peaceful. More peaceful than he had looked in 8 years. She knew before she touched him. She knew by the stillness, by the quality of the silence, by the way the air in the room felt different, felt emptied of something that had been there before. Heart attack. That is what the coroner said. Massive and sudden. He had probably been gone before he knew what was happening. Wren stood in the living room of the house where she had grown up, looking at her father's body in the blue light of the television, and she felt something she did not expect. Relief. Not relief that he was dead, but relief that he was no longer suffering. Relief that the slow fire that had been going out inside him for 8 years had finally finished going out. Relief that he was with her mother now. If there was a place where people went after they died, if there was anything at all beyond the silence, and beneath the relief something else. Freedom. It was an ugly thing to feel. She knew that. She hated herself a little for feeling it, but she could not deny it. For 8 years she had been tethered to this house, to this town, to a father who was present in body but absent in every other way. She had stayed because she did not know what else to do, because leaving felt like abandonment, because some part of her still hoped that someday he would come back, that the father she remembered from before her mother died would return. But he was never going to return. And now he was gone. And she was free. The house was not hers. It had never been theirs, really. It was rented from a man named Hartley, who owned 3 houses in town and collected rent checks on the 1st of every month, and never fixed anything unless you threatened to call the county. 2 days after the funeral, Hartley came to see her. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets and told her he was sorry for her loss. He told her she had 2 weeks to vacate. He told her his daughter needed the place and the rent was paid through the end of the month. And that was the best he could do. Wren nodded. She had been expecting it. She spent the next week packing up her father's things. His clothes went into boxes for Goodwill. His tools went into boxes for Goodwill. The furniture that had been old when her parents bought it 20 years ago stayed where it was too heavy and too worthless to move. She kept 2 things. Her father's old wool fishing sweater, the one he used to wear on cold mornings when she was small, the one that still smelled like him, if she pressed her face into it and breathed deep, and a framed photograph of her mother and father from 1998. They were young in the photograph, smiling, standing on a pier somewhere, water behind them squinting into the sun. Wren did not know where it was taken or when or why they were there. She had never asked, and now there was no one left to tell her. She put the photograph and the sweater in her duffel bag with everything else she owned. And on the morning the lease ended, she walked out of the house with her bags and her coffee can and stood on the porch and looked at the front door for a long moment. Then she pulled it closed, and she did not look back. The bus to Jackson left at 9:15 in the morning. Wren sat in a plastic seat in the station and watched the clock and thought about where she was going. Not in the immediate sense. She knew where she was going immediately. She was going to Jackson to catch the 11:40 bus to Baton Rouge. But beyond that, beyond today, beyond tomorrow, she thought about Haskell. He had mentioned his brother a few times over the years, a man named Bo, who ran a marine repair shop on the bayou outside of Houma, Louisiana. Haskell had said more than once that if Wren ever wanted to learn boats from the inside out, his brother would teach her. She had never planned to take him up on it, but standing in the bus station in Jackson with everything she owned in 2 bags and $1,128 left in the coffee can, she realized she had nothing else to plan toward. No family, no home, no future that she could see from where she was standing. Just a brother of a man who had been kind to her. Just a bayou she had never seen. Just water. She bought the ticket. The ride south was long and slow and gave her time to think. Mississippi rolled into Louisiana as the bus crossed the state line somewhere south of Natchez. The land flattened. The air grew thick and wet, pressing against the windows like something live. The trees changed oaks, giving way to cypress and tupelo, their roots standing in dark water like the legs of patient animals waiting for something that might never come. Spanish moss hung from the branches in long gray curtains. Wren watched it all through the bus window with the kind of attention she gave to anything she was trying to memorize. This was a place she had never been. A place that looked nothing like the dry, flat cotton country of central Mississippi. But somehow she had always known about it, the way you know the shape of a word in a language you do not speak, the way you know the melody of a song you have never heard, the way you know deep in your bones that you are going somewhere, you belong. The bus rolled south through the afternoon. Wren pressed her forehead against the window and watched Louisiana unfold. She arrived in Houma at dusk. The bus station was a small concrete building beside a gas station. The air smelled different here, wet and green and alive, like something was growing everywhere all at once. The humidity wrapped around her like a second skin. Wren stepped off the bus and stood on the curb with her bags at her feet and her coffee can in her backpack. A truck was waiting for her. Haskell had called ahead. He had not asked why she was leaving Mississippi. He had not asked about her father. He had just listened when she called from the payphone in Jackson and told him she was coming. And then he had said, "My brother will be waiting." The truck was a Ford F-250, dented and rust-spotted and covered in a layer of dust that looked like it had been accumulating for years. The man behind the wheel looked exactly like Haskell, but with a full beard going gray at the edges in a way of holding himself that suggested he had spent his whole life working with his hands. Beau Broussard. He did not say much. He got out of the truck and took her duffel bag and threw it in the bed. He nodded toward the passenger door. He waited until she was inside before he pulled away from the curb. They drove in silence for a while. The road wound through the outskirts of Houma past gas stations and grocery stores and the scattered lights of a small Louisiana town settling into evening. Then the buildings thinned. The lights grew fewer. The road narrowed and the pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to dirt, and the trees closed in on both sides like walls, Bo drove with one hand on the wheel and one elbow out the window. The warm, wet evening air did most of the talking. After about 10 miles, the road opened up. Wren saw water. It was everywhere, dark and still and reflecting the last light of the sun. Channels and inlets and backwaters winding through the cypress trees. The bayou. The shop was on a small peninsula of solid ground jutting out into the water. An open-sided wooden building with a corrugated metal roof. A small dock extending into the darkness. A few boats tied along the dock shape she recognized from her years at the store. A fishing skiff. A cabin cruiser with weed-streaked sides. An aluminum John boat. And at the end of the dock, listing slightly to port, was an old houseboat. Bo parked the truck and got out. He stood for a moment looking at the houseboat, then looked at Wren. "That is what I wanted to show you," he said. His voice was like Haskell's, but with the soft edges of a Louisiana accent. "Old Cormac Thibodeau's place. He died last year. No family. Haskell said you might be looking for something." Wren walked down the dock. The boards creaked under her feet. The water below was black and still. Something splashed in the darkness, fish or frog or something larger. The houseboat was about 30 feet long. The hull was steel-painted white originally, but now mostly rust with patches of bare metal showing through. Corrosion bloomed along the waterline like some kind of mineral disease. The cabin sat on top of the hull, a flat-roofed wooden structure with peeling turquoise paint that had probably been beautiful once decades ago, before the sun and the rain and the humidity had done their work. 2 small windows ran along each side, clouded with age and grime. A weathered wooden door faced the dock, the frame swollen and warped. An old life ring hung crooked on the railing, the rope rotted but still attached. The whole thing sat low in the water, weighted with whatever was inside it, and whatever water had seeped in through the hull over the years. It was a wreck. But Wren did not see a wreck. She saw the lines. She saw what the boat had been. The hull was steel, which meant it could be patched, sanded, painted. Steel lasted. Steel could take damage and keep going as long as you caught the rust before it ate through. The cabin was wood, which meant it could be replaced, board by board if necessary, plank by plank. The shape was good, low and stable, designed for slow water, for floating, not racing. It was the kind of boat that did not need to go anywhere, because it was already where it was supposed to be. "How much?" Wren asked. Bo scratched his beard. The sound was like sandpaper on wood. Cormac owed back fees on the slip. Marina was going to sell it for scrap, but I told them I would hold it. The fees come to $10 even. He looked at her. "You wanted it as yours. $10. Wren took off her backpack. She opened the coffee can. She counted 10 $1 bills, worn and soft from being handled so many times, and she placed them in Bo's open palm. He looked at the money. He looked at her. "You know how to caulk a seam?" he asked. "Yes." "You know how to mix marine epoxy?" "Yes." "You know what to do if you find a hull breach below the waterline?" Wren looked at him. "Pump the bilge, identify the source, patch from outside if you can, from inside if you cannot, thickened epoxy and a wood backer. Monitor for 24 hours, reseal as needed." Bo smiled for the first time. It was a small smile, barely more than a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it was real. Haskell said you knew your stuff, he said. I did not believe him. He handed her a key. Old and tarnished, the kind of key that had opened and closed the same lock 1,000 times. Sleep on it tonight. We will start in the morning. Wren stepped onto the houseboat for the first time as the sun went down behind the cypress trees. The bayou was turning 100 shades of orange and gold. The water reflected the sky so perfectly that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Spanish moss caught the last light and glowed like strands of copper wire. The deck creaked under her feet, but it held. She unlocked the cabin door and pushed it open. The smell hit her first. Mildew. Old fabric. The faint, sweet rot that water-damaged wood gets after enough years. It was not pleasant, but it was not unbearable. It was just old. Neglected. Waiting. Inside was a single small room, maybe 10 feet by 12. There was a built-in bunk along one wall, the mattress rotted and stained with water damage, and things she did not want to think about. A small galley with a propane stove that had corroded to uselessness. A table and 2 folding chairs, one of them missing a leg. A few cabinets along the walls, mostly empty, the wood swollen and warped from years of humidity. Everything was falling apart, but everything was still there. Wren set her bags on the table and stood in the middle of the cabin and turned slowly. She could feel the boat moving slightly under her feet. A gentle rocking from the small wake of a fish jumping outside. Or maybe a gator sliding into the water. Or maybe just the bayou breathing the way water breathes when it is alive. The walls were close. The ceiling was low. The light coming through the small windows was dim and green gold, and watery, the color of light filtered through cypress trees and Spanish moss. Something about it felt right. She could not explain it. Maybe it was the rocking, the way the floor moved like something alive beneath her. Maybe it was the smallness, the containedness, the way every surface was within arm's reach. Maybe it was just that this was her first boat. After years of drawing boats and stocking boat parts and reading boat manuals at the dinner table, while her father stared at the news and did not see her. Whatever it was, Wren felt it the way you feel. A key turn in a lock you did not know was there. Click. Something opening. Something falling into place. She slept on the floor that night. The rotted mattress she pushed against the wall. She unrolled her sleeping bag on the bare wooden floor and lay down with her backpack as a pillow and her father's wool sweater pulled around her shoulders. The bayou outside was alive with sounds she had never heard before. Frogs in chorus, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, their voices rising and falling in waves. Owls calling from the cypresses, low and mournful. The slow lap of water against the steel hull. A rhythm like breathing. A splash that might have been a fish or might have been an alligator. Or might have been something else entirely. Wren lay awake for a long time. She listened to the sounds of this place that was not home. That was nothing like home, that was so different from the dry silence of Mississippi that it might as well have been another planet. And at some point, somewhere in the hours between midnight and dawn, she stopped feeling afraid and started feeling held, like the boat was wrapping itself around her. like the water was cradling her, like her mother's arms, which she had not felt in 8 years, were somehow reaching across death and distance to hold her one more time. "You have the soul of someone who belongs on the water," Lorraine had said. "Someday the water will call you home." Wren closed her eyes. The water lapped against the hull. The frogs sang their endless song. And for the first time since she was 11 years old, Wren Calloway slept without dreaming of loss. The next morning came with fog. It rolled in from the deeper channels sometime before dawn, thick and white and heavy, swallowing the cypress trees and the dock and everything beyond the railings of the houseboat. Wren woke to a world that had been erased. Just gray light filtering through the cabin windows. Just the sound of water. Just the feeling of being suspended in something larger than herself. She lay still for a moment listening. The frogs had gone quiet. The birds had not yet started. There was only the boat creaking gently as it shifted in the water, and the soft lap of waves against the hull, and somewhere far away the low rumble of an outboard motor moving through the fog. Then footsteps on the dock, heavy boots on old wood, a knock on the cabin door, 3 sharp raps. Wren sat up. Her back ached from sleeping on the floor. Her neck was stiff. Her hands were cold. She opened the door. Bo stood on the deck with 2 cups of coffee in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Steam rose from the cups and disappeared into the fog. The smell of chicory and sugar cut through the damp air. "Beignets," he said, holding up the bag. "From a place down the road. Best in the parish." He did not wait for an invitation. He sat down on an overturned crate on the deck and set the coffee cups between them. Wren took one and wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. They ate in silence for a while. The beignets were warm and soft and covered in powdered sugar that got everywhere, on her clothes, on her face, on the deck of the boat. Wren did not care. She had not eaten since the bus station in Jackson, and the sweetness hit her bloodstream like a drug. When the bag was empty, Bo brushed the sugar from his beard and looked at her. "You ready to see what you bought?" Wren nodded. "Then let us talk about what needs to happen." Bo pulled a small notebook from his shirt pocket. The pages were water-stained, and the cover was held together with electrical tape. He flipped it open and began to read. The list was long. The hull needed patching, sanding, repainting. There were at least 3 places where the rust had eaten through to bare metal, and probably more that they could not see until they hauled the boat out of the water. The cabin needed gutting. The walls were rotted. The floor was soft in places. The ceiling had water damage from a leak in the roof that had probably been there for years. The plumbing was non-existent. Whatever system Cormac Thibodeau had used was long gone corroded or removed or simply broken beyond repair. The electrical was suspect. Old wiring, probably original insulation, cracked and brittle, a fire waiting to happen. The propane system was worse. The stove was corroded. The lines were cracked. The tank was rusted through. The bilge pump was seized. That was the first problem. Before anything else could happen, they needed to get the water out of the bottom of the boat and see what they were working with. 6 months if you do it right, Bo said, closing the notebook. Maybe longer. You can stay on her while you work, but it is going to be rough. No power, no running water, no heat. Just you and the boat and whatever you can make happen. Wren looked at the houseboat, at the peeling paint and the rusted hull and the crooked life ring hanging from the railing. I can do rough, she said. Bo studied her for a moment. His eyes were the same as Haskell's, the same color, the same weight, the same way of looking at a person like they were a problem to be figured out. Then he nodded. We start with the bilge. The bilge is the lowest part of a boat. It is the space below the floor where water collects, where things get stored, where if you are not careful, mold and rot and mystery accumulate over the years until what you have is not storage anymore, but archaeology. Wren had read about bilges in the manuals at Haskell's store. She had seen diagrams. She had studied the systems that were supposed to keep them dry, the pumps and the drains and the channels that move water from where it collected to where it could be expelled. But she had never actually been inside one. The hatch was in the center of the cabin floor, a square of plywood with a recessed handle swollen from moisture and stuck in its frame. Wren had to pry it up with a screwdriver, working the blade around the edges until the seal broke and the wood came free with a wet, sucking sound. The smell that came up was worse than the cabin, damp and dark and biological. The smell of things that had been underwater for too long. The smell of decay arrested, but not stopped, suspended in the airless space below the floor. Wren leaned over the opening and shined her flashlight down. The bilge was full of water, dark water, still water, about 6 inches deep, covering whatever was at the bottom. The beam of the flashlight penetrated only a few inches before the murk swallowed it. She looked at Bo. He handed her a bucket and a coffee can. Start bailing, he said. I will check the pump. Wren climbed down into the bilge. The water was cold. It soaked through her shoes immediately, through her socks up to her ankles. The space was tight. She could not stand up straight. She had to crouch, bent at the waist, her back already starting to ache. She scooped the first can of water and dumped it into the bucket. Then the second. Then the third. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of scooping and dumping and climbing up the ladder to empty the bucket over the side. 2 hours of cold water and bad air and muscles that screamed for her to stop. Her shoulders burned. Her lower back felt like someone had driven a knife into it. Her hands cramped around the handle of the coffee can. But she kept going. Scoop, dump, climb, empty, descend, repeat. The water level dropped inch by inch. And as it dropped, things began to emerge. Old tools rusted beyond use. A coil of rope rotted through. Bottles and cans and the remains of things that had once been paper, but were now just pulp. The bones of a small animal, probably a rat, that had found its way into the bilge and never found its way out. And beneath it all, as the last of the water drained away, something else, a footlocker. Wren stopped bailing. She stood in the bilge with the water around her ankles and the flashlight in her hand and stared at what she had found. It was old, the kind of footlocker that soldiers used to take to war. Brass corners tarnished green but still solid. Leather straps dried and cracked but still holding. A heavy padlock on the front rusted shut. The footlocker was sitting on a platform. Someone had built it. A small wooden shelf raised up from the bottom of the bilge by about 8 inches. Enough to keep the footlocker above the waterline. Enough to keep it dry. The platform was rotted now. The wood was soft and black and falling apart. But it had done its job. For 40 years, it had done its job. The footlocker itself looked intact. Wren reached out and touched it. The brass was cold under her fingers, solid, real. She climbed out of the bilge and went to find Bo. He came back with her. He stood at the edge of the hatch and looked down at the footlocker for a long time. His face was unreadable. His hands were still. The fog had lifted outside, and morning light was streaming through the cabin windows, but down in the bilge it was still dark and close and full of secrets. Cormac was an interesting man, Bo said finally. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. Served in the Marines, 1966 to 1972. Stationed overseas, Okinawa mostly. Sometime in the Philippines. He never talked about it much. Just said he saw things, heard things, carried things home that he could not put down. He paused. He bought this boat in 1979, lived on it for 44 years, never married, never had children, worked as a mechanic in Halma, saved everything, spent almost nothing. Another pause. People used to wonder where his money went. Nobody ever asked, because Cormac was not the kind of man you asked things. Bo looked at Wren. I think we just figured out where it went. They lifted the footlocker out of the bilge together. It was heavy. Surprisingly heavy. The kind of heavy that old wooden chests get when they are full of metal, full of weight, full of years. They set it on the deck and Bo handed Wren a hacksaw. It is your boat, he said. You should be the one. Wren knelt in front of the footlocker. The padlock was rusted almost solid. The shackle was fused to the body. She fitted the blade of the hacksaw against the metal and began to cut. The sound was harsh and loud in the quiet morning. Metal on metal. Progress measured in millimeters. It took 15 minutes. The lock fell to the deck with a dull metallic thud. Wren set down the hacksaw. She unbuckled the leather straps one by one, the old leather cracking under her fingers. She placed her hands on the lid, and she lifted it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow stayed dry after all these years, were rows of small canvas bags. Each bag was tied with a piece of twine. Each bag had a paper tag attached, the kind you might use for labeling boxes in a warehouse. And on each tag, written in faded ink in a careful, precise hand, was a date. The earliest date was 1979. The latest was 2022. 43 bags, one for each year, except for 2 years that were missing. 2001 and 2008. Those tags were not there. Wren lifted one of the bags. It was heavy in her hand, heavier than it should have been for its size. She untied the twine. She opened the mouth of the bag. She looked inside. Coins. Old silver coins. Walking Liberty $50. Morgan silver dollars. Mercury dimes. Dozens of them packed tightly inside the canvas, cool and smooth, and gleaming dully in the morning light. She lifted another bag. More coins. A third. Paper money this time. Old bills, folded in half and held together with a rubber band that had dried out and cracked, but still held. A fourth bag held a mixture, coins and bills together. A fifth held only dimes. A sixth held only quarters. A seventh was so full of silver dollars that the seams of the canvas strained. 43 bags. One for each year between 1979 and 2022, except for the two that were missing. Each bag held what Cormac Thibodeau had been able to save that year. Some years were heavier than others. The bag from 1981 was almost empty. The bag from 2003 was so full that Wren could barely lift it with one hand. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she had found. "We need to count it," Bo said quietly. "We need to know what is here." Wren nodded. But she was not thinking about the money. She was thinking about the man who had saved it. Year after year, bag after bag, coin by coin and bill by bill, building up a record of his life, one quiet deposit at a time. Why? What had he been saving for, and why had he left it here in the bilge of a boat for someone he would never meet? The counting took 2 days. Bo helped. He knew a coin dealer in Thibodeau, a man named Fontenot, who had been buying and selling silver for 40 years. Fontenot drove out to the shop in a pickup truck loaded with scales and reference books and magnifying glasses. He was old and thin and had the kind of careful hands that came from a lifetime of handling valuable things. He did not ask questions. He just weighed and measured and cataloged, making notes in a leather-bound ledger that looked older than Wren. The coins were worth more than their face value. Much more. The silver content alone was significant. But some of the coins were rare. Morgan dollars from the 1890s. Walking liberties from the 1940s. Mercury dimes that had been out of circulation for decades. The bills were simpler. Just cash. Ones and fives and tens and 20s accumulated over the years, some of them so old they looked like they belonged in a museum. When Fontenot finished his calculations, he looked up from his ledger and removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. $48,200, he said. Give or take a few hundred depending on the market. Wren stared at him. That is what it is worth, Fontenot continued. The coins, the bills, all of it, 48,000 and change. He closed his ledger and stood up. Cormac was a patient man, he said. I knew him a little. Not well. Nobody knew him well. But I knew he was patient. 44 years of patience right there in those bags. He shook Bo's hand and then Wren's, and he drove away in his pickup truck. And Wren stood on the dock and watched him go and tried to understand what had just happened. $48,000. She had bought the boat for 10. And now she had 48,000. It did not feel real. It felt like a dream, the kind where you find something impossible and you know you are going to wake up and it will be gone. She kept waiting for that moment, for the alarm to ring, for the light to change, for someone to tell her it was all a mistake. But the bags were still there. The coins were still there. The money was real. And so was what she found at the bottom of the footlocker. Beneath the last canvas bag resting on the wooden bottom of the chest were two objects, The first was a folded American flag, the kind they give to families at military funerals, red and white and blue folded into a tight triangle, the stars facing outward. It had been folded with care, with precision, by hands that had been trained to fold flags that way. The second was a sealed envelope. The envelope was yellowed with age. The seal was unbroken. And on the front, written in the same careful hand that had labeled all the bags, were 4 words: "To whoever finds this." Wren held the envelope for a long time. She could feel Bo watching her. She could feel the weight of the moment, the importance of it. This was not just money. This was not just coins and bills and silver. This was a message. A letter from a dead man to a living woman. A connection across time, across death, across the unknowable distance between one life and another. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. The handwriting was the same. Careful, precise. The writing of a man who had learned to do things correctly, who had been trained to follow procedures and complete tasks and leave no detail unattended. Wren unfolded the paper and began to read. "My name is Cormac Thibodeau. I was born in Cocodrie, Louisiana in 1948. I grew up on the water. My father was a shrimper. His father was a shrimper. I thought I would be a shrimper too. But life had other plans. I served in the United States Marine Corps from 1966 to 1972. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan for most of that time. I also spent time in the Philippines. I never saw combat. But I saw enough. I saw men leave and not come back. I saw the ones who came back changed. I saw what war does to people even when they are not fighting it. I came home with a head full of things I could not put down. The only place I could put them down was on this boat, on this water where it was quiet enough to think and small enough to handle. The world out there was too big, too loud, too full of things I did not understand anymore. But the boat was simple. The water was steady. The bayou did not ask questions. I bought this boat in 1979 for $400. I have lived on it ever since. Every year I saved what I could in a bag with that year written on it. Some years I could save more. Some years I could barely save anything. But I saved something every year. It was a habit, a practice, a way of marking time, a way of proving to myself that I was still here, still moving forward, still alive. I do not have family. The men I served with are mostly gone. There is no one to leave this to. So I am leaving it to whoever finds it. If you found this footlocker, you came onto my boat for a reason. Maybe you needed a place to be. Maybe you were trying to build something. Maybe you were just lost. I was all of those things once. I was all of those things for most of my life. I hope this helps. The boat is a good one. She has carried me a long way without ever moving from her slip. Some boats are like that. Some lives are like that. You do not have to go anywhere to travel far. You just have to stay still long enough to let the current carry you where you need to be. Take care of her. Cormac Thibodeau, May 2020. 2. Wren read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and sat on the deck of the houseboat with the morning sun coming up over the bayou and the cypress trees casting long shadows on the water. She did not cry, but her throat was tight, and her chest was heavy, and she thought about her mother and her father, and Cormac Thibodeau and everyone she had ever loved and lost. She thought about the drawings in the kitchen drawer, about the folder that was an inch thick, about her mother's words. You have the soul of someone who belongs on the water. She thought about her father in his recliner ember by ember going out. She thought about Cormac alone on this boat for 44 years saving coins and writing letters to no one. And she understood for the first time in her life that being lost and being found were not opposites. They were the same thing, just at different times. The work began in earnest. Wren used part of the money to do it right, not extravagantly, not wastefully, but correctly, the way Haskell had taught her, the way Bo showed her. Measure twice, cut once. Do not take shortcuts. Build something that will last. She opened a bank account in Houma. The teller was a young woman about her age, who took one look at the canvas bags in the paper grocery sack and called for the manager. The manager, a Cajun woman in her 50s named Therese, looked at Wren carefully and asked if she could explain. Wren showed her Cormac's letter. Therese read it slowly, her finger moving across the lines. When she finished, she handed it back and looked at Wren with something in her eyes that might have been recognition. You take care of that boat share, she said. Cormac was a good man, quiet, private, but good. He would be glad it is going to someone who cares. The hull came first. They hauled the boat out of the water using a winch system Bo had built years ago, sliding it slowly up onto a set of heavy wooden blocks in the yard behind his shop. Out of the water, the houseboat looked even worse than Wren had expected. The rust was everywhere. Along the entire waterline, the white paint had given way to blooms of orange and red and brown. Below the waterline, she could see two places where the steel had been patched before decades ago, with what looked like sheet metal screwed in place. Quick fixes. Temporary solutions that had somehow lasted 40 years. But they were failing now. Wren sanded the entire hull down to bare metal. She worked with a power sander hour after hour, day after day. The noise was constant. The dust was everywhere. Her arms shook by the end of each session. Her shoulders ached so badly she could barely raise them above her head when she crawled into her sleeping bag at night. But she kept going. The rust came off inch by inch. The bare steel appeared underneath. It was dull silver in the morning light, warming to bronze when the afternoon sun hit it. Strong, solid, still good despite everything. By the end of the second week, the hull was clean. Then she ground out the rust spots with a wire brush attachment, treated them with phosphoric acid to convert any remaining rust to inert iron phosphate, applied marine epoxy to the worst sections, building up the metal with thickened resin layer by layer. Bo showed her how to feather the edges so the patches would flow smoothly into the surrounding steel. He showed her how to mix the epoxy to the right consistency. Like peanut butter and jelly for a sandwich, he said. Not too thin, not too thick, it stays where you put it. She did the bow first because the bow was the worst. When she got it right, she did the rest the same way. 2 coats of epoxy primer, white gray and dense, the kind that bonds to steel like skin. Then 3 coats of marine enamel. The color was special. She had driven to a marine supply in Huma to get it mixed. The man behind the counter had been blending custom marine paints for 30 years. He took one look at Wren, this young woman with the paint-spattered clothes and the determined eyes, and he said, "I know exactly what color you want. Hold on." He came back with a quart of blue so deep it looked almost black. The color of the Gulf at midnight. The color of sleep without dreams. The color of safety. Wren painted the first stripe on the bare hull and stepped back, and she knew he was right. When the hull was done, it looked like a different boat. It looked like a boat that wanted to live. Bo stood beside her in the yard the day she finished the 3rd coat. The sun was going down behind the cypress trees. The fresh paint gleamed in the golden light. "I have been working on boats for 35 years, he said. "I have never seen a first-time hull job that good." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The storm came 3 months into the restoration. They called it Eleanor. It formed in the Gulf sometime during the first week of September, a tropical depression that strengthened into a tropical storm, that strengthened into a hurricane that turned north toward Louisiana. Category 2. Possibly Category 3 by landfall. Winds up to 100 miles an hour. Wren had never experienced a hurricane. In Mississippi, they got the edges sometimes. The outer bands. Rain and wind and fallen branches. But not the center. Not the real thing. This was gonna be the real thing. Bo wanted to haul the boat out again. Get it up on blocks. Tie it down and hope for the best. But the hull work was done and the cabin work was half finished. The walls were stripped to the frame. The roof was partially rebuilt. There were tarps everywhere holding out the rain, but they would not hold in a hurricane. If they moved the boat now in its half-finished state, the storm would tear it apart. If they left it in the water, at least it could move. At least it could ride the surge. Wren made a decision. She was going to stay. Bo tried to talk her out of it. He said she was crazy. He said she was gonna get herself killed. He said Cormac's money was not worth dying for. But it was not about the money. It was about the boat. It was about staying when things got hard. About not running. About proving to herself and to Cormac, wherever he was, that she was worthy of what he had left her. She tied extra lines to the dock. She double-checked every knot. She stowed everything that could become a projectile. She filled containers with fresh water and packed food that did not need cooking. And when the storm came, she was ready. It hit at night. The wind came first. A low moan that built to a howl that built to a scream. The houseboat pulled against its lines like a frightened animal trying to escape. The rain came sideways so hard, it felt like needles against the skin. The cypress trees bent nearly double. The bayou churned. Wren sat in the cabin and listened to the world try to tear itself apart. At some point during the night, the water started coming in. She felt it before she saw it. A coldness around her ankles that should not have been there. She grabbed her flashlight and opened the hatch to the bilge. Water was rising. Fast. There was a breach somewhere. The storm surge had pushed the boat down, pressed against the hull, found a weakness that the calm water had not found. And now the bayou was coming in. Wren dropped into the bilge. The water was up to her calves, cold and dark and rising. She swept the flashlight across the hull, looking for the source, looking for the place where the water was coming through. There, port side, just below the waterline. A seam that had opened up. Not a hole exactly, but a gap, where two plates of steel met a gap that had probably been sealed with caulk decades ago. Caulk that had dried out and cracked and finally given way. Water was streaming through. Not a lot. Not a catastrophic flood. But steady. Relentless. Enough to sink the boat if it was not stopped. Wren grabbed the manual bilge pump and started pumping. With one hand she pumped. With the other she held the flashlight. The water level held steady for a moment, then began to drop. But she could not pump and patch at the same time. She had to choose. She chose to patch. She let go of the pump and grabbed her emergency kit from where she had stowed it. Inside was marine epoxy, a mixing stick, a piece of wood for a backer. She had prepared it earlier that week, hoping she would not need it, knowing she probably would. The water rose while she worked, past her knees, past her thighs. The boat was sinking inch by inch while she mixed the epoxy by flashlight in the howling dark. Her hands were shaking. From cold, from fear, from exhaustion. But they were steady when they needed to be. She pressed the backer against the gap from the inside. She slathered it with thickened epoxy. She held it in place with one hand while she reached for the pump with the other. Hold, pump, hold, pump. The epoxy needed time to cure. 20 minutes minimum, 30 to be safe. She did not have 30 minutes. She had whatever the storm would give her. The water stopped rising. It did not go down, but it stopped rising. The patch was holding, not perfectly. She could see water seeping around the edges, but it was holding enough. Wren pumped. She pumped until her arm burned, until she could not feel her fingers, until the water was back down to her ankles and the patch was starting to set. Then she climbed out of the bilge and sat on the cabin floor in her soaking clothes and listened to the storm rage outside. It raged until dawn. And then it was over. The sun came up on a world that had been rearranged. Trees were down everywhere. The dock had lost 3 planks. Debris floated in the water, branches and boards and pieces of things that had once been other things. The bayou was brown and swollen, running higher than Wren had ever seen it. But the boat was still there, still floating, still hers. Bo arrived an hour after sunrise. He had ridden out the storm in his shop, which was built to withstand hurricanes, anchored to concrete pylons driven 20 feet into the ground. He came down the dock with his toolbox in one hand and fear in his eyes. The fear disappeared when he saw Wren sitting on the deck. She was exhausted. Her clothes were still wet. Her hands were raw from the pump handle. But she was alive. And she was smiling. Bo climbed aboard and looked at the patch she had made. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Who taught you to do that?" Wren thought about Haskell, about the store in Mississippi. about all the hours she had spent memorizing catalogs and learning systems and preparing for a moment exactly like this one. Someone who said everything is a system, she told him, and if you can see the system, you can fix it. Bo nodded slowly. From that moment on, he treated her differently, not like a student anymore, like a colleague. The restoration continued. The cabin came next. Wren gutted it down to the steel frame of the deck, pulling out the rotted plywood walls in chunks, ripping out the corroded wiring, removing the broken propane stove with a wrench, and a lot of swearing. She filled 3 trash bags with mildewed insulation, and old fabric, and the carcasses of dead spiders. When the cabin was empty, the bones of the boat stood bare in the bayou sun. She rebuilt it piece by piece. Marine plywood for the walls, cedar siding for the interior, closed-cell foam insulation between the studs, new windows on each side larger than the originals so the cabin would fill with light. She rebuilt the roof with marine plywood and rolled roofing material. She installed a small skylight in the center, positioned so that a beam of sun would fall directly onto the table she was going to build. She tore out the corroded propane system and installed a new one. Properly vented this time, with a regulator and a shut-off valve and a carbon monoxide detector mounted on the ceiling. She replaced all the wiring with marine-grade cable color-coded the way Haskell had taught her. She added a solar panel on the roof connected to a battery bank in a sealed compartment beneath the bunk. She installed a freshwater tank that held 30 gallons and a hand pump at the small sink she built in the galley. A composting toilet behind a curtain in the corner. Simple, sustainable, self-sufficient. Inside, she built furniture from cedar and pine. A built-in bench that doubled as storage. A drop-leaf table that folded against the wall when not in use. A bed in the bow that fit her exactly with drawers underneath for clothes. Bookshelves built into every available wall space because she was going to fill this boat with books. Marine engineering manuals. Field guides to bayou plants and birds. A complete set of Joseph Conrad. A worn paperback of Moby Dick that her mother had loved. She kept Cormac's footlocker. She cleaned the brass corners with vinegar and salt until they gleamed. She oiled the leather straps until they were supple again. She placed it under the bed where she could see it when she made the bed in the morning. Inside, she kept the folded American flag and the letter. And one bag from 1979, the first year Cormac had started saving. The bag was empty now, but she liked having it there, a reminder of where everything had started. As the months passed, the people of the bayou started to know her. Bo introduced her to fishermen and shrimpers and swamp guides who passed through his shop. They were curious at first. A young woman from Mississippi living alone on a houseboat, rebuilding it with her own hands. That was not something you saw every day, but curiosity turned to friendliness, and friendliness turned to acceptance. The bayou had its own pace and its own customs. You did not get welcome by being loud or asking questions. You got welcome by showing up consistently and doing your work and not making a fuss. Wren was very good at all 3 of those things. A woman named Odette started bringing her gumbo. Odette ran a small Cajun restaurant in town, the kind of place where the menu had not changed in 30 years and did not need to. She drove out to the dock every Friday afternoon in a pickup truck with a cooler in the bed. She handed Wren a mason jar warm from the cooler. She refused to take any money for it. "You eat that tonight, Cher," she would say. "You need real food. You are too thin." Odette had been Cormac Thibodeau's friend, one of the only people in town he had let close. And Wren understood without asking that the gumbo was a way of keeping a promise. A man named Landry taught her to catch crawfish. He fished crawfish for a living, running 100 traps across the shallow waters near the dock. He was quiet and patient, and had the kind of weathered face that came from decades of early mornings on the water. He showed her how to bait the traps with chicken necks, where to position them along the bank, how to check them at dawn before the herons got to them. Within a month, Wren had a steady supply. She boiled them in a big pot on her propane stove with cayenne and lemon and beer that Beau sometimes gave her. And she ate them sitting on the deck of the houseboat, watching the sun come up over the cypress trees. And then Parnell came. He was old, 80 years old at least, maybe more. His hair was white and thin. His hands were spotted with age. His eyes were rheumy but still sharp, still seeing. He had been a tugboat captain for 50 years, running barges up and down the Mississippi River. He had retired 20 years ago, and now he spent his days in a small house near the marina watching the water and waiting for something he could not name. He had known Cormac Thibodeau since they were boys in Cocodrie. He came down to the dock one Sunday afternoon and stood looking at the houseboat for a long time. The hull was gleaming. The new cabin was nearly finished. The solar panel on the roof caught the afternoon light. It looked like a different vessel than the wreck Wren had bought 8 months ago. But the bones were the same. He would be happy, Parnell said finally. His voice was soft, worn down by decades of wind and weather. Cormac would be happy. He always said this boat had more in her than people gave her credit for. Same way he felt about himself, I expect. He turned to look at Wren. "You are the one who found it," he said. It was not a question. The footlocker, the money, the letter. Wren nodded. "Then I expect you should hear the rest of the story." They sat on the dock together, their feet hanging over the edge, the water moving slowly beneath them. And Parnell began to talk. He talked about Cormac as a boy, wild and laughing and full of life. He talked about Cormac's father, a shrimper who died at sea when Cormac was 15, leaving him to support his mother alone. He talked about the decision to join the Marines at 18, the only way out of a poverty that seemed destined to swallow him whole. He talked about the years overseas, the bases in Okinawa and the Philippines, the men who shipped out to places Cormac could not go, and the men who never came back, the survivor's guilt that aided him like rust. The question that never stopped asking itself, why them and not me? He talked about Evangeline. Wren had not heard that name before. Evangeline was a girl from Homa, beautiful and kind and patient. She and Cormac had been in love before he enlisted. She had promised to wait for him, but the years were long, and the letters stopped coming. And Evangeline, not knowing if Cormac was alive or dead, or simply gone married someone else 3 months before he came home. It broke something in him, Parnell said. Not his heart. Something else. Something deeper. The part of him that believed things would work out. The part that trusted the future. He never got that back. Wren listened. She thought about her father, about the fire going out ember by ember. The years the bags were missing, she said. 2001 and 2008. What happened those years? Parnell smiled, a small, sad smile. 2001, a family on the bayou lost everything in a storm. Their house, their boat, their savings. They had 3 children and nowhere to go. Cormac gave them every dollar he had saved that year, paid for them to start over. He paused. 2008, his dog got sick. Old Shepherd, he called him. That dog lived on this boat with Cormac for 14 years. Cancer in the stomach. The vet said surgery might save him, but it would cost everything Cormac had put away that year. He paid it. He paid it. The dog lived another 2 years. Died in his sleep right there on the deck, where you were sitting now. Cormac buried him in the cypress grove behind the marina. Parnell reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. He was not a man who saved things for himself, Parnell said. He was a man who was waiting for the right person to give it to, waiting for someone who would understand. He handed Wren the box. Inside were old photographs. Cormac as a young man in his Marine uniform, serious and handsome. Evangeline at 18, smiling at the camera, her eyes full of light. A dog with a gray muzzle lying on the deck of the houseboat. The boat itself, decades ago, the paint fresh and the wood unweathered. And beneath the photographs, another envelope. This one was addressed in the same careful hand, but not to whoever finds this, to Evangeline. It had never been opened. It had never been sent. Cormac wrote that 30 years ago, Parnell said. He never had the courage to give it to her. I think he was afraid of what it would do. To him. To her. To the peace he had finally found. He looked at Wren. But you are not afraid, he said. I can see that. And I think maybe it is time someone finished what Cormac started. Wren held the envelope in her hands. The paper was soft with age. The ink had faded. But the weight of it was immense. 30 years of silence. 30 years of words unsaid. 30 years of a man living alone on a boat carrying a letter he could not bring himself to send. She did not know what was inside. She did not know if she had the right to read it, but she knew with sudden certainty that this was why she was here. Not just for the boat, not just for the money, but for this. For the unfinished story of a man who had saved everything he had for someone he would never meet, someone who would finish what he could not. The sun was setting over the bayou. The cypress trees were turning gold. And Wren Calloway, 19 years old and no longer lost, sat on the deck of her houseboat and made a decision. Wren did not open the letter that night. She sat with it for a long time after Parnell left, holding it in her hands, as the sun finished setting and the bayou turned from gold to purple to black. The envelope was soft with age, the paper worn thin at the edges from years of being held and put away by hands that could never quite let go. She thought about opening it. She thought about what might be inside. Words of love, words of anger, words of forgiveness or accusation or simple, quiet grief. 30 years of silence compressed into a single envelope waiting to be released. But it was not her letter. It had never been her letter. She put it back in the wooden box with the photographs and placed the box beside Cormac's footlocker under her bed. She lay down in the darkness and listened to the water lap against the hull and the frogs sing their endless chorus and the night birds call from the cypress trees. And she made a decision. She was going to find Evangeline. Not to deliver the letter. That was not her choice to make. But to see her. To understand the other half of a story that had shaped a man's entire life. To look into the eyes of the woman Cormac Thibodeau had loved and lost and never stopped carrying. Maybe then she would know what to do. She asked Odette the next Friday when the gumbo arrived. Odette set the warm mason jar on the deck and looked at Wren for a long moment. Her eyes were knowing. She had lived in this bayou country her whole life, and she understood that some questions were not casual. "Evangeline Landreau," she said finally. "That is who you are asking about. You know her. Everyone knows her Cher. She has lived in Houma her whole life. Married Raymond Landreau in 1972. He was a good man. Worked the rigs for 30 years. Died 5 winters ago. Heart trouble." Odette paused. "She still lives in the same house they bought together. Little yellow place on Bayou Terrebonne about 2 miles past the high school. You cannot miss it. There is a magnolia tree in the front yard that is older than both of us put together." Wren thanked her. Odette did not ask why she wanted to know. She just picked up her empty jars from the previous week and walked back to her truck and drove away. Some questions were not casual, and some answers were not meant to be explained. Wren went the next morning. She borrowed Beau's truck, the same dented F250 that had picked her up at the bus station 8 months ago. The seats were cracked leather. The dashboard was sun-faded. The radio only worked on one station, which played nothing but old Cajun music and weather reports. She drove into Houma with the windows down and the humid air flowing through the cab. The town was small but sprawling the way Louisiana towns often were. Strip malls and fast food restaurants, and old wooden buildings that had been standing since before the interstate came through. She passed the high school Odette had mentioned. She counted the miles. The yellow house was exactly where Odette said it would be. It was small and tidy with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides and window boxes filled with flowers that were just starting to bloom. The magnolia tree in the front yard was enormous, its branches spreading wide enough to shade half the property. White blossoms hung heavy from the limbs, filling the air with a sweetness that was almost overwhelming. Wren parked the truck at the curb. She sat for a moment looking at the house. An old woman was sitting on the porch. She was small and slight, her white hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a blue house dress and a cardigan despite the warmth. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was watching the street with the patient stillness of someone who had learned to wait. She was watching Wren. Their eyes met across the distance, and Wren knew without being told that this was Evangeline. She got out of the truck and walked up the path. The magnolia blossoms brushed against her shoulders as she passed beneath the tree. The air was thick with perfume. Bees hummed in the branches overhead. Evangeline did not move. She just watched her eyes following Wren's approach with an expression that was impossible to read. Not hostile, not welcoming, just watchful, patient. The look of a woman who had seen many things in 75 years and was no longer surprised by any of them. Wren stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Mrs. Landro, the old woman, nodded. "My name is Wren Calloway. I bought Cormac Thibodeau's houseboat." Something moved in Evangeline's eyes, a flicker of something old and deep surfacing for just a moment before disappearing again. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was soft but clear with the rounded vowels of Cajun country. "Odette told me you were asking about me. I expected you would come." She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Sit down, Cher. I have been waiting a long time for this conversation." Wren climbed the steps and sat. The chair was old wicker creaking under her weight. From here, she could see the bayou through the trees at the back of the property, a ribbon of dark water winding through the cypress, the same water that flowed past her houseboat 10 miles away. Everything in this country was connected by water. "You found something?" Evangeline said. It was not a question. "In that boat. Something Cormac left behind." Wren nodded. "Money. A letter. And this." She reached into her bag and pulled out the wooden box Parnell had given her. She opened it and took out the envelope that had never been sent. Evangeline looked at it. Her face did not change, but her hands folded in her lap tightened almost imperceptibly. 50 years of control keeping something contained that wanted to break free. "He wrote me a letter," she said softly. "After all this time. 30 years ago. That is what Parnell told me. He never sent it." "No." Evangeline's voice was barely a whisper. "He would not have. That was not who he was. Cormac never could say the things that mattered, not out loud, not to the people who needed to hear them." She reached out and took the envelope from Wren's hand. Her fingers trembled as she held it, just slightly, just enough to show that beneath the calm exterior, something was breaking open. "I was 18 when he left," she said. "We were going to get married. That was the plan. He would do his time in the Marines and I would wait. And when he came home, we would build a life together. A house, children. All the things young people dream about when they do not know any better." She turned the envelope over in her hands. But the years were long, and the letters stopped coming. Not all at once, slowly. One a week became one a month, became one every few months, became nothing. I did not know if he was alive or dead. I did not know if he had stopped loving me or just stopped being able to write. What happened? Evangeline was quiet for a moment. "Raymond happened," she said finally. "He was a good man, kind, steady. He had loved me since high school, and he never stopped even when I was with Cormac. He waited, and when I had been waiting for 2 years with no word, when I had convinced myself that Cormac was never coming back, Raymond asked me to marry him." She looked at Wren. "I said yes. 3 months later, Cormac came home." The words hung in the air between them. 3 months. That was all. 3 months between the wedding and the return. 3 months that changed the course of 2 lives forever. "I saw him once," Evangeline said. "After he came back. He was standing outside the grocery store on Main Street. just standing there, looking at me. I was with Raymond. We were loading bags into the car, and Cormac was across the street watching. Her voice broke slightly. He did not say anything. He did not come over. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he turned and walked away. I never saw him again. Not in person. Just heard about him sometimes. Living on that boat. Working at the garage. Keeping to himself. 50 years, Wren said softly. 50 years, Evangeline agreed. 50 years of living in the same town and never speaking. 50 years of knowing he was out there on that boat and never gonna see him. Never knowing what to say. Never knowing if he hated me or forgave me or had simply stopped caring. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. And now I have my answer. 30 years too late. You do not have to read it, Wren said. Not now, not ever. I just thought you should have the choice. Evangeline smiled. It was a small smile touched with sadness and something else. Something that might have been gratitude. I have been waiting 50 years to know what was in his heart, she said. I do not think I can wait any longer. She slid her finger under the flap of the envelope. The old paper tore easily, the glue long since dried out. She pulled out a single sheet folded in thirds and opened it. And she began to read. Wren watched her face as she read. She saw the tears come slowly at first, then faster, rolling down the weathered cheeks, catching in the lines and wrinkles that 50 years had carved. She saw Evangeline's lips move silently, forming words that Cormac had written 3 decades ago, words he had never been able to speak. When Evangeline finished reading, she sat very still. The letter rested in her lap. The tears kept falling, but her eyes were not sad. They were peaceful. He forgave me, she said. Her voice was barely audible. All this time I thought he must have hated me. For not waiting. For giving up. For breaking the promise I made him. But he forgave me. She looked at Wren. He said he was never angry. He said he understood. He said the war changed people and I could not be expected to wait for someone who might never come back, or might come back as someone I no longer knew. She touched the letter gently as if it were something fragile. He said he found peace, that the boat gave him what he needed, that the water was enough, that he hoped I had found peace too. She was crying openly now, not with grief but with release. 50 years of guilt and uncertainty finally dissolving. I did not destroy him, she whispered. All this time I thought I destroyed him, but I did not. He survived. He found his own way. He was okay. Wren reached out and took Evangeline's hand. It was thin and fragile, the bones prominent beneath the papery skin. But the grip that closed around her fingers was strong. Thank you, Evangeline said. Thank you for bringing me this. Thank you for finishing what he could not. They sat together on the porch for a long time. The magnolia blossoms swayed in the breeze. The bees hummed. The bayou flowed past at the back of the property, connecting this house to the houseboat 10 miles away, connecting this woman to the man she had loved and lost, and never stopped wondering about. After a while, Evangeline asked if she could see the boat. I never went, she said. In 50 years, I never once went to see it. I was afraid, I think. Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of what it would feel like to stand where he stood to see what he saw every day. I would be honored to show you, Wren said. They drove back together in the dented F250. Evangeline sat in the passenger seat, the letter folded carefully in her hands, looking out the window as Houma gave way to the bayou country. The cypress trees closed in on both sides. The water appeared dark and still and patient. When they reached the dock, Evangeline sat for a moment just looking. The houseboat gleamed in the afternoon sun. The hull was midnight blue, deep and rich. The cedar cabin glowed warm and golden. The new windows caught the light. The solar panel on the roof winked silver. It looked nothing like the wreck Wren had bought 8 months ago, but it was still Cormac's boat. The bones were the same. Wren helped Evangeline down the dock. The old woman walked slowly, carefully, but her eyes were bright and eager. She reached out and touched the railing as they approached, ran her fingers along the smooth wood, felt the boat move gently beneath her feet as she stepped aboard. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, Cormac." She stood on the deck, turning slowly, taking it all in. The rebuilt cabin, the bookshelves visible through the windows, the deck chairs Wren had built, the life ring repainted and rehung the rope new and strong. "It is beautiful," Evangeline whispered. "You made it beautiful." "He made it beautiful," Wren said. "I just uncovered what was already there." Evangeline smiled at that. She stepped into the cabin and looked around, at the built-in bench, at the drop-leaf table, at the bed in the bow with the drawers underneath, at the books on every shelf, marine manuals and field guides and Joseph Conrad and the worn paperback of Moby Dick. She saw the footlocker under the bed. "May I?" she asked. Wren nodded. Evangeline knelt down slowly and with effort and pulled the footlocker out. She opened it and looked inside. The folded flag. The letter Cormac had written to whoever found the boat. The empty bag from 1979. She picked up the bag and held it. "He saved money every year," she said. "Parnell told me. Every year for 40 years, and he left it all for a stranger." "Not a stranger," Wren said. "For whoever needed it. That is what his letter said. For whoever came to the boat looking for something." Evangeline nodded slowly. "That was Cormac," she said. "Even when he was hurting, he was thinking about someone else, someone he would never meet, someone he wanted to help." She put the bag back in the footlocker and closed the lid. "He was a good man," she said. "I knew that when I was 18. I knew it when I married Raymond. I knew it every day for 50 years, when I wondered what might have been. He was a good man, and I was lucky to have been loved by him." She stood up, using the edge of the bed for support. "And now I know that he knew it too, that he found his way, that he was okay." She looked at Wren. "Take care of this boat," she said. "Take care of what he built. It is his legacy, and now it is yours." After Evangeline left, Wren sat on the deck and watched the sun go down. The cypress trees turned gold, then orange, then purple. The water caught the colors and held them a mirror reflecting the sky. The frogs began their evening chorus. The night birds started to call. She thought about Cormac Thibodeau, a man who had loved and lost and spent 50 years alone on a boat, saving coins and writing letters he never sent. A man who had carried guilt that was not his to carry. A man who had found peace in the quiet and the water and the slow passage of years. She thought about Evangeline, a woman who had made a choice and lived with it for 50 years. A woman who had carried guilt that was not hers to carry either. A woman who had finally found release, finally found forgiveness, finally found peace. She thought about her mother, about the folder of boat drawings in the kitchen drawer, about the words that had stayed with her all these years. You have the soul of someone who belongs on the water. Someday the water will call you home. And she thought about her father, about the fire going out ember by ember, about the recliner in front of the television, about the man who had stopped being present long before he stopped being alive. She understood now. She understood that loss does not have to destroy you. That grief does not have to become your whole life. That you can carry the weight of what you have lost without letting it pull you under. Cormac had shown her that. He had lived alone for 50 years, but he had not been destroyed. He had found his own kind of peace. He had saved his coins and written his letters and taken care of his boat. He had helped people when they needed it. He had loved his dog and buried him in the cypress grove. He had lived. Not the life he had planned, not the life he had dreamed of, but a life, a real life. A life with meaning and purpose and quiet, steady grace. That was the inheritance he had left her. Not just the money, not just the boat, but the example. The proof that you could lose everything and still find a way to live. The 8th month ended. The houseboat was finished. Wren stood on the dock one morning and looked at what she had built. The hull gleamed midnight blue in the early light. The cedar cabin glowed warm and golden. The windows sparkled. The solar panel caught the first rays of sun and converted them to power. It was beautiful. It was hers. Bo came down the dock with 2 cups of coffee, just as he had on the first morning. He handed her one and stood beside her looking at the boat. I have been working on boats for 35 years, he said, and I have never seen anything like this. You helped me build it, Wren said. No. He shook his head. I showed you some things. I gave you some tools. But you built it. Every plank and every wire and every coat of paint. This is yours, Wren. This is what you made. He was quiet for a moment. Haskell was right about you, he said finally. He said you had something, that you understood boats in a way that could not be taught. I did not believe him at first, but I believe him now. He looked at her. I need help at the shop. Real help. Not just weekend work. Full time. I'm getting old, and there is more work than I can handle alone. I need someone who knows what they are doing. Someone I can trust. Wren looked at him. Are you offering me a job? I am offering you a partnership, Bo said. Eventually, start as an employee. Learn the business side. The customers, the suppliers, the parts of running a shop that do not involve getting your hands dirty. and when I am ready to retire, which will be sooner than you think, the shop is yours." Wren did not know what to say. 8 months ago, she had been homeless. She had been standing in a bus station with everything she owned in 2 bags, with no future she could see. Now she had a boat, a home, a community that had welcomed her, and an offer to build a life here in this place where the water had called her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will do it." Bo nodded. He did not smile. He was not the kind of man who smiled often, but something in his eyes softened. "Good," he said. "We start tomorrow." The people of the bayou knew her now. She was no longer the stranger from Mississippi. She was no longer the young woman who had bought Cormac's old wreck. She was Wren Calloway. She worked at Bo's shop. She lived on the houseboat at the end of the dock. She knew how to fix an engine and patch a hull and read the weather by the color of the clouds. She belonged. Odette brought her gumbo every Friday and stayed to talk. Landry taught her to read the crawfish runs to know when the good ones were moving and where they would be. Parnell came by on Sundays to sit on the dock and tell stories about the old days, about Cormac and Evangeline and the bayou as it used to be. Evangeline came once, just once, a month after her first visit. She brought a photograph framed in simple wood. Cormac as a young man before the Marines, before the boat, before everything, smiling at the camera with all the joy and possibility of someone who did not yet know what was coming. "I want you to have this, Dee," she said, "to remember him by, to remember what he was before he became what he became." Wren hung it on the wall of the cabin next to the photograph of her own parents from 1998. 2 couples, 2 loves, 2 stories that had ended differently than they were supposed to. But stories did not end, Wren thought. They just changed. They became other stories. They flowed into new channels like water finding its way around obstacles. Cormac's story had become her story, and her story was just beginning. One evening in late May, Wren sat on the deck of her houseboat and watched the sun go down over the bayou. The cypress trees were silhouetted against the sky. Spanish moss moved in the warm breeze. The water was glass flat and reflected the sky so perfectly that it looked like the boat was floating in the air. A heron stood on one leg in the shallows about 30 feet away, motionless, patient, waiting for a fish that might never come. Wren watched the heron. The heron watched her back. 2 solitary creatures studying each other in the way that only solitary creatures can. Recognizing something. Acknowledging something. A kinship that went beyond species or circumstance. She thought about everything that had happened. About her mother who had seen something in her before she had seen it in herself. About her father who had stopped but was finally at peace. About Haskell who had taught her that everything was a system. About Bo, who had become the closest thing to family she had left. About Cormac, who had saved his coins and written his letters and left everything to a stranger, who turned out not to be a stranger at all. About Evangeline, who had finally found forgiveness after 50 years of carrying guilt that was never hers to carry. About the boat beneath her feet, steady and strong, rising and falling gently with the breath of the water. She went inside and got paper and a pen. She sat at the drop-leaf table with the evening light coming through the windows, golden and warm. She thought for a long time about what to write. Then she began. To whoever finds this. My name is Wren Calloway. I came to this boat when I was 19 years old, homeless and alone with $10 in my pocket. I found what Cormac Thibodeau left behind, and it changed my life. Now I am leaving something behind for you. This is not about the money. That was just numbers. Just coins and paper that had value, because we agreed it had value. What Cormac really left me was something else. Something that cannot be measured or counted or stored in canvas bags. He left me proof. Proof that you can lose everything and still find a way to live. Proof that you can be alone without being destroyed by loneliness. Proof that you can carry grief without letting it sink you. He left me this boat, and now I am leaving it to you. I do not know who you are. I do not know what brought you here. Maybe you needed a place to be. Maybe you were trying to build something. Maybe you were just lost. I was all of those things. But here is what I learned. Being lost and being found are not opposites. They are the same thing, just at different times. The lost always find their way eventually if they keep moving. And the found are only found because they were once lost. This boat is a good one. She has carried me through storms and stillness. She has given me a home when I had none. She has taught me that you do not have to go anywhere to travel far. You just have to stay still long enough to let the current carry you where you need to be. Some boats are like that. Some lives are like that. Take care of her. She will take care of you. And when you are ready, write your own letter. Leave it where the next person will find it. Pass on what was passed to you. That is how it works. That is how the current flows. From one to the next, across the years, across the water, across all the distances that seem impossible until you have crossed them. Wren Calloway, May 2025. She folded the letter and put it in an envelope. She wrote on the front in careful letters to whoever finds this. She got a canvas bag from the drawer and wrote the year on a paper tag. 2025. The first year. The beginning of her own collection. She opened the footlocker under her bed. The flag was there. Cormac's letter was there. The empty bag from 1979 was there. She placed her letter beside his. She placed her bag beside his bag. And she closed the lid. Outside, the sun had set. The bayou was dark and silver, reflecting the first stars. The frogs were singing. The night birds were calling. The water lapped against the hull in a rhythm as old as time. Wren stepped out onto the deck. The heron was still there, still standing on one leg, still waiting. She watched it for a long time. And then she smiled. Not because anything was funny, not because she was happy exactly, but because everything was right. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. She was home. The water had called her just as her mother had said it would, and she had answered. And now she was here on this boat, in this place, with this life that she had built from nothing. She thought about her mother's words. You have the soul of someone who belongs on the water. Someday the water will call you home. She thought about Cormac's words. Some boats are like that. Some lives are like that. And she thought about her own words, the words she had just written, the words that would wait in the footlocker for whoever came next. Being lost and being found are not opposites. They are the same thing, just at different times. Wren Calloway was 19 years old and homeless. She had $10 in her pocket, and she spent it on a rusted houseboat tied to a forgotten dock on a backwater inlet in southern Louisiana. It was the best $10 she ever spent because it bought her more than a boat. It bought her a home. It bought her a family. It bought her a place in a story that had started long before she was born and would continue long after she was gone. The pull of the water had led her here. The same pull that made her draw boats when she was a child. The same pull that took her to Haskell's store. The same pull that put her on a bus heading south with nothing but a coffee can full of dreams. She did not understand it. She could not explain it. But the pull was real, and it was old. And if you listened to it long enough, it would lead you somewhere. For some people, that somewhere was a place they were born to, a family business, a hometown, a profession chosen by their parents. For others, it was a place they had to invent, a boat on a bayou, a lighthouse on a cliff, a mill beside a creek, a cabin in the woods. The form did not matter. What mattered was whether you could stand inside it, look around and feel something settle in your chest, something that said, this is the place. This is where I begin. Wren stood on the deck of her houseboat in the darkness, surrounded by water and stars and the endless song of the bayou. And she felt it. That settling, that certainty, that peace. She was home, and this was where she would begin.